Hello and welcome to the My School channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we're going to continue the government topic by topic video lesson. So now we're moving on to a new topic, that's Constitutional Development 2, where we're going to discuss the independence and post-independence era. So I've divided this video lesson into 3 segments. So we're going to begin with the first part, where we discuss the Independence Constitution and the first Republican Constitution. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to My School channel. Like I said earlier, we are moving on to the first segment of this video lesson where we discuss the Independence Constitution and the first Republican Constitution. So let's dive right into it. So here is a list of the topics that we're going to discuss. We are going to begin with the Independence Constitution of 1960. Alright, so the Independence Constitution of 1960 resulted from constitutional conferences held between 1953 and 1958. Remember in the previous video lesson, we talked about these various constitutional conferences, one in 1953, another in 1957, and another one in 1958. So, in 1953, London Conference agreed to review Nigeria's constitution after 3 years, but the review was delayed until in 1957 Lancaster Conference. We discussed about this in detail in the previous video lesson. Then the 1957 conference followed an inquiry into minority group concerns, and this led to the creation of the Willings Commission of Inquiry. So this investigated fears of ethnic domination. So the Willings Commission report advised against new states, but recommended constitutional safeguards for minority rights, which were incorporated into the new constitution. We talked about the different constitutional safeguards. We talked about how the fundamental human rights will be stipulated in the Independence Constitution, and how so many different agencies will be created to help safeguard the rights of minority groups. Now let's move on to the next slide. Alright, we also talked about the 1958 conference which was held in September, which finalized agreements for Nigeria's independence. So they agreed that the independence date would be 1st of October 1960. Other agreements included the retaining of a federal structure with greater autonomy for the regions. So the federal system of government will be adopted in the new constitution. It also discussed resource allocation based on the principle of derivation, especially for revenue from mining and agriculture. That means that they will divide the national revenue and allocate it to the various states of the federation. So they also discussed clear procedures for localizing the public service and judiciary, and to prepare Nigerians to fully manage their affairs after independence. So public service and the judiciary, they discussed how to localize it. That means to allow for these various organs to be present in various regions within a country so that they can interpret laws and implement policies based on the needs of these different regions. These developments formed the foundation of the 1960 Independence Constitution and marked Nigeria's transition from a British colony to a sovereign nation. Now let's move on to the next slide. Alright, what are the key features of the Independence Constitution? One of the key features is that it was to adopt a parliamentary system of governments. So between 1960 and 1966, Nigeria adopted a parliamentary system. This was changed under the 1979 Constitution, which we are going to discuss later on. So Nigeria adopted the Westminster parliamentary model with a ceremonial head of state, which is the British monarch but is represented by the Governor General. So at that time, the British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, was the head of state of Nigeria. Even though Nigeria had gained independence, Queen Elizabeth II was still Nigeria's head of state in 1960. This head of state was represented by the Governor General in the person of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was elected as the Governor General of Nigeria. He performed ceremonial functions on behalf of Queen Elizabeth II. Then we had an executive prime minister who was the head of government. This person was in charge of day-to-day affairs of government. He was responsible for policy direction along with members of the cabinet that is select after the election. So this person was Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who was Nigeria's first prime minister, and he was prime minister from 1959 down to 1966. Now let's move on to the next slide. Another feature of the Independence Constitution is bicameral legislature. At the federal level, there was a bicameral assembly, which was made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. It is important to note that it is under the 1960 Independence Constitution that Nigeria adopted the bicameral legislature at the federal level. Although this system of legislature was adopted at the regional level before 1960. So each of these various regions had a House of Chiefs and a House of Representatives and a House of Assembly. But now at the federal level, we have a bicameral legislature where we have the Senate House, which is the upper house and consists of members nominated by the regional legislatures and the Governor General. And then we have the House of Assembly, which is the lower house and consists of members that are elected directly by the people. Now let's move on to another feature. So another feature is that Nigeria adopted a federal structure. So Nigeria remained a federation of 3 regions, the northern, western, and eastern regions, each with its own government, its own House of Assembly, and governor. So this means that Nigeria continued with the federal system of governments. Now let's move on to another feature. Okay, we also have the position of the Governor General, which was introduced in 1960. So the Governor General represented the British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II in Nigeria. He performed ceremonial duties but acted on the advice of the Prime Minister. So this means that the ceremonial functions did not allow him to perform executive functions. The executive functions were undertaken by the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister have to seek approval from the ceremonial president before things can be implemented within the society. So the advice of the Prime Minister is what the Governor General acts on. Now let's move on to another feature. And that feature is the presence of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. The Prime Minister was selected from the majority party in the House of Representatives. The Prime Minister also appointed other ministers to form the federal cabinet. So this is the Westminster model. During an election to the House of Representatives, people select members who represent them in the House of Representatives from their constituency. And then when the House is filled, the political party with the majority of seats becomes the government for the day. And so the Prime Minister is the leader of that political party. So in that case, it is the person of Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who was the leader of the Northern People's Congress, the political party that had the majority in the House. Of course, remember from our previous video lesson, we talked about how this majority was formed through a coalition. So they formed the coalition with the NCNC. So Abubakar Tafawa Balewa became the Prime Minister and he selected his cabinet members from his own party men within the House. So this is how the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, also known as the Cabinet Ministers, were formed at that time. So these people were responsible for policy direction at that time. Now let's move on to another feature. We also have regional autonomy. Each region had a high degree of legislative and executive independence. So the region controlled matters like education, health, and local governments. So these matters that they controlled were matters under the concurrent and residual list. We are going to discuss that later on. So these were the matters that the regional governments had autonomy, control over. So they were able to discuss matters of education, health, and local government. That means they could create schools and universities within their region. They could discuss health policies that can help to improve the health sector. They also discuss how local government should be run within the region. These are matters that the regional governments were allowed to administer. Now let's move on to another feature. And that feature is the presence of an independent judiciary. Though the judiciary was claimed to be independent, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London remained the final court of appeal. This means that the Federal Supreme Court that was created in Nigeria at that time wasn't the Supreme Court in Nigeria. The final court of appeal was the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in Britain. This means that when there are certain cases that could not be discussed within the Federal Supreme Court, it had to be referred to the Privy Council in Britain. So this undermined Nigerian sovereignty at that time. Now let's move on to another feature. And that feature was the entrenchment of the fundamental human rights in the Constitution. So right to life, dignity, expression, movement, religion, and freedom from discrimination were all guaranteed and entrenched in the Constitution. Remember how they discussed this, that the fundamental human rights should be entrenched to protect minority rights. So it was actually entrenched in the Independence Constitution of 1960. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, what are the achievements of the Independence Constitution? One of the achievements is political independence. The Constitution marked the legal end of colonial rule and the birth of Nigeria as a sovereign nation. So that was when Nigeria gained independence. So it is what marks Nigeria's transition from colonial rule to sovereignty, to independence. Now, another achievement is the presence of a democratic government. So it introduced a fully Nigerian-led democratic system modeled after Britain's parliamentary democracy. So this is another merit of this constitution. Britain no longer governed Nigeria. Nigeria was able to govern itself. And that achievement is the entrenchment of the fundamental human rights. The constitution was the first Nigerian constitution to entrench a comprehensive Bill of Rights. So by fundamental human rights, we mean those rights that have been discussed and put in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that every independent nation of the world have to sign and put in their constitution in order for the government to be able to respect them. So another achievement is federalism. It consolidated Nigeria's federal identity, giving autonomy to the regions and reducing the fear of central domination. So federalism continued to be practiced in the Nigerian society at that time. And that achievement is membership of the United Nations organization. So after independence, Nigeria officially became the 99th member of the United Nations. Now let's move on to the next slide. Okay, and that achievement is peaceful transition. The constitution enabled a non-violent and negotiated transition from colonialism to independence. So unlike other African nations, Nigeria achieved peaceful transition. They did not have to go into war or any form of conflict in order to gain independence. Another achievement is representative governance. It introduced regular elections, representation, and ministerial responsibility to the people. This means that the people were allowed to select leaders who would represent them when it comes to making decisions on their behalf. So this is a representative form of democracy. Then another achievement is civic symbolism. So the Constitution established national identity symbols like the flag, the national anthem, the coat of arms, and also instilled civic pride. All of these things were introduced in the Independence Constitution of 1960. Then we also had a bicameral legislature. Both the central and regional governments had a bicameral legislature. The House of Senate and Representatives for the center and the House of Chiefs and Assembly for the regional. So the presence of this bicameral legislature allowed for more representation in governments. It allowed people to elect more people to represent their interest in each of these various legislative houses. Now let's move on to the next slide. Okay, we're going to discuss the weaknesses of the Independence Constitution. One of the weaknesses is the retention of the British monarch as head of states. This is a major weakness because it's undermined Nigeria's sovereignty. Nigeria was not fully sovereign since the head of state, the ceremonial leader, was still the Queen of England. Then there was also judicial dependence. Although we claim that there is a judiciary, a federal Supreme Court in the nation, the Privy Council in Britain remained Nigeria's final appellate court. That means there were certain issues that Nigeria were not allowed to adjudicate upon. They had to recommend that to the Privy Council, a nation outside of what they claim to be sovereign. And that weakness is ethnic and regional rivalries. Federalism intensified ethnic divisions as each region prioritized its interest over national unity. So again, we can see how dividing the country along ethnic lines led to more crisis. Each of these regions had to advocate for the interest of just the region and not the entire nation. Then there was also no uniform electoral system. The regions still operated different electoral systems. So while the West and the East had universal adult suffrage, the North had adult male suffrage. This means that women in the North were still not allowed to vote at that time. And that major weakness of the Independence Constitution. So we've come to the end of this segment of the video lesson. I believe it was educative and enlightening. If you would like to continue on this journey with us, please go down to the link in the description below. This takes you to my school website where you can subscribe for the government topic by topic video lesson. There you can continue on this journey with us. So now we're going to move on to the political developments in Nigeria from 1959 down to 1966, so we can see how that relates to the creation of the Republican Constitution. I hope to see you there. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please do not forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release next videos.